I think like just like by being raised in that type of environment, you become tolerant to risk. You become tolerant to uncertainties.
But that's interesting because there are people who would experience that. And the way they would think about it is, I need to play safe a bit because I saw my parents struggle. I want to make sure that I don't have to go through what they went through.
I think as a small startup, you have a million battles to fight. It's not your role to change the policy of this country.
I feel like you can't out entrepreneur policy. Welcome to Unfiltered with Posh People, where I explore the world of immigrant entrepreneurs. And these are stories told by immigrant entrepreneurs themselves. Today, I'm talking with Ben Su, who runs Capita. But why I wanted to talk with him was we had this interesting exchange on LinkedIn where he talks about how the visa system works in Canada. And I'm hoping we can explore that on this conversation. When you decided to move to Canada, what were you thinking? Because, I've read a couple of your posts about the VC system here and all that, and you have a good beat of or a good understanding of some of our systemic issues. But I want to kind of start off with, when you're saying, okay, I'm moving to Canada to school, what was in your head at that point in time? Were you saying, oh, I'm just coming here to school and I'll go to the US at some point, or I'm going to come here to school and I'll start a business as you've done? Like, what were you thinking of?
Well, I was actually 12 years old.
Oh,
yeah. When I came with my parents, right? That's okay. So yeah, like why I wanted to come to Canada. I didn't want to do homework in China. Honestly, it's like people complain about the number of hours they have to work, the working conditions. Talk to a Chinese elementary school kid. They literally, like outside of school, they have another full-time job, and that's called, study. So,
Jeez.
yeah, I hated that lifestyle. I didn't want to, spend the entire day doing nothing but studying and sleeping and eating. And I wanted to, experience childhood. That's why that was my selfish point of why I wanted to move to Canada. Although it wasn't my decision because I was 12, it was my parents' decision. And then they also see the validity in that. They also wanted me to grow up in a healthier environment where you don't have to spend like 16 hours a day studying.
I mean, it does have its advantages. I think it does have its advantages because I've met a lot of really, really smart Chinese kids. I mean, there's also the pressure that comes with it, and that I agree is what's the balance.
Yeah. So I think like you do have like the possibility of excelling in that type of environment, because if you spend 16 hours a day studying, and if you can really do a good job on studying, then yeah, sure, like they can produce some like really awesome engineers and whatever, right? But the problem is most people can't survive that type of certainly I wouldn't say most people, but like I couldn't survive that type of environment. I like to play video game once in a while. You know what I mean? I don't want to just like do math all day. Yeah.
But I mean, the point is that you lived in China till you're 12, right?
Yeah.
And if you think of how and we're going to go back and forth a bit in this, but I'm just kind of going straight into something which I found interesting when you were saying this to me. If you think about those first 12 years there, do you think it has in any way influenced how you approach business in Canada? Now you're running your business. Do you think it didn't have a part to play in how intense you can be? Because I do think you're pretty intense. You do play video games, but I think the way you approach things, it can be pretty intense. So do you think it did affect you in some way? Like it left like a mark, like, so you're not exactly, maybe you didn't do it till you're 16, 17, but the fact that you spent 12 years there means that to some extent you did it to some extent, and it has a role to play in how you approach the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So not only I was studying like every waking hour, but so my parents also thought it was a good idea to sign me up for like pro martial arts training program. So literally Monday to Friday and on Saturday and Sundays, I will have to go train martial arts. And I was probably the third youngest person on the team. And if we hadn't gone to Canada, I probably would have gone pro. So yeah, just like, I used to run 4 kilometers just as a warm up, and then we start fighting. And then you run 4K, and then you get in the ring. And I was 11 years old, so yeah, like I think it definitely helped me build resilience, perseverance, um, and yeah, I could. It definitely helped me to learn how to take punches in the face and not give up. Yeah,
4 kilometers every morning
as a
as
warm up.
as a warm up.
Yeah, I can do that now. Like I've never been that fit ever since I stopped. Like, but when
Jeez.
I first came to Canada, I ranked in gym class for all the grade 7 kids. We used to do those like cardio fitness endurance tests. I was number one, like in my
Of course.
cardio. Yeah, eh, yeah, I was number one. And hey, like everybody just stopped running. I was like, hey, look, I just started. Like, let's go. But everything was a downhill from there in terms of my cardiovascular fitness.
Culture. I mean, culture.
Yeah,
Culture.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Culture. And kind of kick it on. If you think about, so life went on, came here, studied
yeah.
and all that stuff.
Hmm.
At what point? At what point did you say? Because I always find folks like you interesting who
Hmm.
moved with their parents, and so
Hmm.
you're like you're somehow a first gen immigrant, but a second gen
Hmm.
immigrant in the sense that your parents are the ones who
Hmm.
face the first level of what it means to be an immigrant settled into a new country.
Hmm.
But if you
Hmm.
think about that journey now and who you are today, do you like are you I don't know how to put that question basically, which is something around
I
how
think I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. So well, I didn't have to experience. I think so. I was in grade 7. I started grade 7 when we came here. Um, I didn't have to experience the hardships of trying to find a job as an immigrant, but I watched my dad, I watched my mom, going through those hardships. I think number one, the biggest hardship is the fact that there's a lot of uncertainties, and um, but we were also super blessed because my dad had a lot of friends in Canada that gave him intros, opened the doors for him, and um, and also I think inherently as an immigrant, uh, you're almost like when you're building a country based on immigration, you're almost optimizing to have a population that's kind of like explorers and people who are not afraid of uncertainties and people who are willing to take risks. So yeah, so I think my parents are like that, and I think but in like according to my standard, I feel I could take more risk than they did
Mhm.
because if they took on this whole risk of going to a foreign land that they knew nothing about, um, me taking a risk to start a company is like nothing, right? The worst thing I can do is like go back into my day job if this thing
Yeah.
didn't work out, right? So I think just like being raised in that type of environment, um, you become tolerant to risk. You become tolerant to uncertainties. And it's like that's what I got out of it. It probably is not for everyone, but what I saw was, hey, sometimes uncertainties is not a bad thing.
Hmm. 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 But that's interesting because there are people who would experience that, and the way they would think about it is, hmm, I need to play safe a bit because I saw my parents struggle, and
Hmm.
I want to make sure that I don't have to go through what they went through. Because you literally came out of school, probably worked for like a year or two, and then you went on to launch a startup. I mean,
Hmm.
we could say there was the Waterloo
Hmm.
effect there, probably to some extent, but still, there are immigrant kids who would experience that thing and just be like, you know what? They start to say to themselves, let's kind of
Hmm.
make sure a bit, because I saw my parents struggle to find themselves, and I want to make sure
Hmm.
that I don't experience what they experience to some extent, and also I don't put them through stress of worry. Am I going to be okay? Because
Hmm.
you kind of just talked about it. You brushed over like, oh yeah, my parents, I saw them. It's not
Yeah,
that easy, man. Like,
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like my dad's first job in Canada was to deliver Domino's pizza. So to this day, if I order pizza or delivery, I will always make sure that I'm giving them a fair tip, because I remember how happy we were when my dad came home. I was like, oh yeah, like some guys, they had a party today, and then they were very generous with their tips, right? So I definitely watched that, but I think for me, back to your question, is that if my parents invested this much into the betterment of our family, then I need to maximize their return on investment, right? Because I don't think my parents should. So the way I do the math in my head is that, um, so my parents went through all that stuff just so that I can have a 9 to 5 job and a mediocre life. No, like, I mean, we could have done this in China, you know? Yeah,
When you put it that way, like when you put it that
yeah,
way, I start to worry about my kids because like if then I'm like if my kids are watching me, then it
yeah,
probably means that they're going to take a lot of risk because they'll say their dad was insane because he used to just do stuff,
yeah,
and you know
yeah,
why can't they do stuff? That's actually a very good way to put it.
yeah.
So now let's talk about entrepreneurship and
Hmm.
run design
Hmm.
to run Capita and stuff.
Hmm.
If you think about one of the things immigrant entrepreneurs especially struggle with is social networks. Like basically, it's
Right.
like you did say this about your dad, where your dad
Hmm.
had friends and intros are helpful, but still, Canada is a very interesting
Hmm.
country in the sense that intros help, but still, it has its limitations and stuff.
Hmm.
But your business, I mean, I was looking at your site and I'm like, this dude, this dude is doing pretty interesting things. Doesn't seem to be
Hmm.
very big on marketing right now. So, like, how are you approaching it from it? How's your social network helping you? Do you think the folks you had in school are what you're that's going through school helped, or did you have to kind of build it from the scratch, like be all lean on what your dad has built?
Well, my dad was a mechanical engineer. He worked for the government. Uh, I think I'm the first entrepreneur in my immediate family, even in my cousins and stuff, right? Um, like I had nothing. Like I had nobody making intro for me. Um, but one thing I was very good at was, as an undergrad, I sent out a lot of cold emails. Um, I didn't know they were called cold emails. But I was like, hey, like this guy seems to be very cool, and I want to reach out to them. Oh, their email address is on their law firm website. Let me, you know, reach out to them. I think I was a third year undergrad, and I had chatted with lawyer partners at one of the biggest law firms in the world, simply by just getting their email address off the website. Because I know, um, yeah, like my dad trained me not to be a shy person. Although I think inherently, I'm a very shy person growing up. But my dad made a point to me that, hey, look, like you cannot be shy. So yeah, I reached out to a lot of those people through code messaging and introducing people when I mean like a conference or meetings, right? And yeah, like eventually I was able to build my network of supporters, and then I think school is like, it's like whatever. It's like if you make the best out of it, you'll have a very good outcome. But if you don't do anything with the resources that are available to anybody in your school, then you're not going to have a good outcome or a desirable outcome. So I think it's like at the end of the day, it's up to how you take advantage of the resources that are available to you.
Yeah. But that point about cold emails. When I was moving to Canada, and this is not, it wasn't for
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurship. When I was moving to Canada, I used to just reach out to people like, "Hey, I'm moving to Canada. This is what I want to
Mm-hmm.
do. Can I just get
Mm-hmm.
on a call with you?" And you're right, like
Mm-hmm.
it changes the game because it
Yeah.
exposes you to a ton of people, to a ton of
Mm-hmm.
you make new friends, you make
Yeah.
cold connections that you can reach out to. You can
Mm-hmm.
warm connections you can reach out to every now and then, and you
Mm-hmm.
never know when you're going to use it. To be honest, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know. And down to the thing, the big thing for me here is, or the big thing I want to talk about with you is raising capital. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
you had this interesting post about the Canadian VC system versus the
Mm-hmm.
US VC system and all that, and I just
Mm-hmm.
want you to kind of help me break that down again, especially for any immigrant entrepreneur who's trying to raise money. Because yes, we
Right.
know that these are pretty interesting times. Raising money is pretty much harder than it used to be. But it
Mm-hmm.
does feel like in Canada, it can be a bit more frustrating than normal. I mean, the comments people make and stuff. And from your experience, because you've raised capital already. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
capital, that's interesting. So you raised capital already, but from your experience, what are the differences? What does Canada get right? What doesn't it get right? What can we do better? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and how does someone who's saying, I want to raise money, how do you even start? That's a lot of questions. I think we can probably start from
Yeah.
your own
Yeah.
experience raising money, and we can then break it down from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe I'll give you like the whole context of like my professional background and how I got here and why I have the opinion that I have. So my undergrad was in biochemistry. My first company was a biotech company.
Mhm.
It was just like the rebellious nature in me. I hated working for the lab I was working at. Um, and I hated knowing the fact that whatever experiments I was doing that day would not generate any significant difference in patients' lives or anybody's life, to be honest. Um, so I asked myself, okay, well, I want to see the impact of my work to actually do something, generate productivity for the society. So I started my first company, biotech. We did infertility diagnostics. I led the commercialization. Essentially, I found a partner at a pharmaceutical company to just like purchase the license of the patent, and then we sold that patent. So that was like a quick 1 year like life cycle for a company from start to selling something, right? And yeah, so that company was never funded by any VCs. It was entirely bootstrap. I didn't pay myself, but I was able to do that because I was a fresh grad. Well, I started in the last semester of the last year of my undergrad, and I didn't have mortgages. I didn't have. Um, I didn't like nobody expected me to be financially independent,
Yeah.
and I certainly didn't expect myself to be financially independent at the time. And my parents supported me. Yeah, so you know, uh, yeah, I was like the youngest. I was always like the youngest person sitting in a boardroom. And I remember I hated people just like talking down on me. Oh, you're young, you don't know this. So what I would do is if I know a meeting is coming up next week, I would not shave for the entire week, just trying to look as old as I can. Um, yeah, but okay, so that company, I from the start to finish, not a single dollar of external funding. Um, but hey, like we generate some, a little bit of cash, which allowed me to pay for my law school and become a venture capital tech lawyer. And then afterwards, I worked in a startup. After graduating law school, becoming a lawyer, I worked in a startup in-house. I worked in a big scale-up, like a $20 billion electric vehicle manufacturer that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I worked on their open source compliance. I worked on their, battery swapping station deployment contracts. Um, and then and then when I went to private practice, represented, investors deploying capital into Canadian startups, and also sat on the founder side, raising capital from investors. So I got to see quite a bit of, transactions before I turned 29. And what I learned was that like raising capital, the success in the outcome of raising capital, it's an outlier. It's not a norm. Like most people who want to raise capital cannot raise capital, and that is just like the reality. So I try to look for patterns from people who were successful in raising capital, and this is what I learned was that you know they raised capital not for the sake of raising capital. Because if they raise capital for the sake of just raising capital and can have some money in the bank and brag to people that they're venture backed founder, they don't deserve to have other people trust them with their money.
Yeah.
It's always like people who are, I think, genuinely interested in solving a hard problem, and they are like they have what we call founder problem fit. They're the right founder solving the particular problem that they're working on, whether it's because of their experience with their job, career, or school, or personal experience. Uh, they are the number one domain expert. They have a unique insight to understanding the problem that nobody else has in the world. And they're not chasing the startup game just for the sake of counting themselves as an entrepreneur. They they're extremely focused on solving the problem. So those people are usually quite successful at raising capital. And if they're not successful raising capital, they may even build a company that would never need to raise capital and just become profitable and scalable over time, right? Yeah.
That thing you said about the outlier thing, just curious, is that across North America, for example, or is that kind of
Yeah.
specific?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the venture capital game, uh, everything happens on the whole principle of power law, right? So if you look at it from the venture capital investor's perspective, um, 90% of the profitability of that investment fund is probably generated from only 10% of the
Yeah.
companies that they invest in.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you go a little bit, take a step back and look at it from the founder's perspective, I think there's a stat out there that only 0.5% of startup companies can raise capital from institutional investors, right? So that's like 5 companies out of 1,000 that can raise capital from big institutions. So this doesn't count if you're raising from friends and family, right? So, um, yeah. So I think it's like uh, in a capital, and that kind of makes sense. Is because because we have a scarcity of capital, then the capital markets is looking for the best steward of that cash, right? Who can turn that cash into more productivity for the society and for their investors, right? So of course, it's going to be a very competitive process. And when we see the capital raising game not being competitive, you get the weird phenomenon of the capital markets in 2021, where a lot of companies that should never been funded or should never been funded at the valuation that they were raising their capital on, but did receive the money. You create a lot of, I would say, destructions in wealth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they burn a lot of money, couldn't build a company to the next step, had to fold the tent, and that goes across the board from not only from the private market but also from public government funding. A lot of projects that should never have been funded but were funded because we had an oversupply of money in that
Mm-hmm.
period in time, right? So you have unprecedented printing of money by the U.S. Federal Reserve and the central banks across the world. That's why I think just going back to your original question, it's not a norm for people to successfully raise capital. It's if they are successful, they are already an outlier.
That's a really interesting take on. Like I never saw it that way. I mean, but I'm not in the
Mm-hmm.
business. But I think what I find, that's a good call out. But I think what I also find interesting is that this thing, and I want to kind of also stay on that a bit, is the fact that the most ambitious Canadian founders go south.
Mm-hmm.
And so despite the fact that the market funds the outliers, the fact is it looks like our market doesn't even fund the outliers, or it funds
Mm-hmm.
a few outliers. And looking at your experience and all the things you've done, do you have any read on the structural, how we're structurally set up as a country that means that we kind of are slower to point out or to identify the outliers and fund them, or is it that we're just not even in the game at all? Like we're not even looking for
Mm-hmm.
the outliers at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the uniqueness about starting a company in Canada is that the country is not entirely functioning based on a free market economics system like the US. Because if you were to go to San Francisco, Palo Alto, New York, it's very rare to find a taxpayer funded business incubator. They don't have the equivalent of Mars Discovery, Community Tech that we have here in Canada. I tried to find them, I couldn't. Uh, but rather you have like these, private market actors setting up incubators called Y Combinator, 500 startups, you know, those tech stars. Um, so I think Canada, because of, you don't have a system that functions entirely on free market principle. There's a lot of companies that should have just taken a punch in the face from the free market saying, hey, look, you're
You
not
know what
building
you're
anything.
doing.
You're not building anything that anybody would pay for. And you need to go back and try to figure out what is it that the problem that you're solving or who you're
Yeah.
solving the problem for. So when we don't have those like critical feedback from a free market, what you create is a whole bunch of companies that should not even exist, right? But they exist because they get shred, the science research and experimental deduction. They get government grants like IRAP and or whatever government like handout that is not a shred or IRAP. Um, so in this case, you're actually creating more noises than signal, right? Um, so yeah, like I think um, we don't have a system that would efficiently select the outliers, right? And this is why for the outliers, they're saying, hey, look, I don't want to be in the same room as someone who's not even just like, having the conversations on, are you building something that people want? Are you building something that people love, that people were willing to pay money for? But the conversations that we have at these public incubators are, hey, when I come to this webinar on how to get shred, like government handouts, I think those are the wrong conversations to have for early stage companies, right? And this is why founders, they don't even like to hang, like the founders who are destined to build great companies, they just don't have the patience to hang out in a room that talks about how to get free government money. They want to be in a room that talks about how do we solve a problem? Like how do we find the people who have the desperation for the problem? So I think going back to your question, we don't have a very efficient system of selecting the outliers. But okay, I'm going off on a tangent, so feel free to stop me whenever. But I think there's a positive in that.
That's okay.
The
Yeah.
po- the positive is that when you are competing against many other startups that are focused on how to get government money, and you focus on serving your customers, solving someone's problem, that would make you an outlier in an even easier way, right? So, for example, like for Capita, we're essentially building the full stack AI law firm. We're a law firm and a tech company at the same time. And I would never, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but like, I do not see anybody in Canada being a competitor. And the reason is because um, we are so focused on just solving people's problem, and we don't care about getting government grants handout. We don't care about like the politics of becoming friends with the CEO of this public funded incubator so that we can get deal flow from these incubators. We don't care about none of that. The only thing we care about is how do we solve this problem in the most efficient way that customers will love us for. And that's it. And that would make us more competitive than anybody who's trying to do the same thing as us in this country. I think the positive thing that I want to say is that, you know, in a small startup, like Peter Thiel has this like philosophy that competition is for losers. So, you know, you want to have zero competition or little competition. Um, I wouldn't say that we have zero competition in Canada, but we have little competition in Canada. And that is, I would say, um, that is something I like personally as a founder because it allows us to, learn and try things without, you know, like 10 other super bloodthirsty, carnivorous founders trying to like compete with us. You know what I mean?
Whoa, that was such a wolf packy description.
Yeah.
I have two questions, follow-up questions for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two. Like, first one is, I hear you on the fact that there's a positive to it, but there's this thing I've believed in for a long time, which is you can't out entrepreneur policy. It's a thesis I have. It's not proven yet, but
I
yeah, I feel like you can't out entrepreneur policy. That at some point, policy catches up with you. It either cuts you down, or or you run it, or you move away from it. And so, like, I hear you when you say that there's no competition and all that stuff, and
yeah.
it's a positive. But don't you
Mm,
think that at some point you either have to just say to yourself that, okay, this market isn't exactly working for me, and I'm going to go somewhere that wants me? Which I'll be heartbroken if you have to move your business out of this country,
yeah.
because I'm like, I'll be totally heartbroken, man. But like, don't it's just a I'm just asking. That's the first question I want
Yeah.
to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. See, like the rebellious nature in me wanted to disagree with you, but the pragmatic person in me is, oh man, like I don't think I can disagree with you on that. Um, so I mean, so I'm kind of like when you drop that line on me, I'm kind of like in an internal, mental debate with myself. Can you all entrepreneur policy? Um, I think as a small startup, you absolutely cannot because you have a million battles to fight
Yeah.
as a small startup, and it's not your role to change the policy of this country.
Hmm.
Focus on like our focus is on surviving.
Yeah.
Like and so I think, but the thing about being an entrepreneur is you always find a way to do things, right?
Fair.
So like you don't take no as an answer. Yeah, like sure, like if Canada gets rid of, all these, I'll give you an example. Like I think Capita. So what we do is we're building the whole law firm that's a tech company with
Hmm.
AI so that
Hmm.
people can afford high quality corporate legal services to start a company.
Yeah.
We would be better off if uh, the government didn't fund a single incubator. The reason is because
That's a bold
we are
statement, man.
we are sometimes being gate kept out of these incubators because these incubators they aggregate all the founders. They obtain all their intentions, right? They say, "Oh, we'll teach you how to get the government grants. We'll give you connections." So they hoard all the attentions of the founders in their community, right? But for us to participate in some of these incubators system, they ask us to pay a $5,000 fee as a sponsor per year without guaranteeing any type of result. For a startup, yeah, like if you're an incumbent company, you have the money to do that, right? You have the money to write a $40,000 check to sponsor one of these incubators. And because these incubators know that we are competitors with incumbents, the big law firms, they intentionally keep us out of those communities, right? Like this is not only unethical, it's anti-competitive, right? You're breaking the anti-competition law. It's unethical, but you also like these incubators are set up as charities. So as a charity, you cannot give a private benefit to your donor or your sponsor. So like it just like so this is why I'm saying like sometimes I wish the government didn't fund any of these incubators so that we can actually have free access to the community and the founders can actually make decisions on whose service that they want to purchase entirely based on a free market principle basis.
Yeah.
So if we have to compete, so our biggest competitors are the big law firms. If we have to compete with them, pound for pound, you know, in a fair
Is the world
competition,
about fair?
then I'm not afraid of it. But it's like, they get to spend like their marketing budget on these incubators and incubators don't let us in. It creates a little bit of friction for us in
Yeah.
this early day.
And I like that you got here because the second question I had for you was somewhere
Mhm.
around there, and it's a flip of the first question, which is Canada is a socialist country. Like that's what Canada is. It's a socialist country.
Yeah.
Like
We can't
I
change
mean,
that.
yeah, we're socialist
Yeah.
with capitalist
Yeah.
tendencies.
Yeah.
You know, but this question is a bit too pronged in the sense that
Mhm.
there are good sides to be a socialist country. There are things,
Mhm.
free healthcare. There's a ton of things that are good
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, which in a free market, sometimes I mean, we can look at America and say, oh, we don't
Yeah.
want some of the things they have. And I'm
Yeah.
just, yeah, if you think about it, like, and we don't have to have the answer here today, but it's like,
Mhm.
isn't there a way to find it somewhere in between the balance that allows us
Yeah.
to be socialist, but also still somehow encourage markets? Because I feel like the biggest problem
Mhm.
I have is that
Mhm.
every single time you talk to someone, is we're talking about grants, and it grinds my gears. Like, please, can we stop talking about grants? Like,
Yeah.
like we said on the pre-show about how
Yeah.
grants allow you to boycott, bypass the consumer. So the
Mhm.
consumer doesn't have to punch you in the face and say to you, you don't know what you're doing because
Yeah.
you have money to
Yeah.
somehow live a free lifestyle till when the
Yeah.
grants run out. And then if you don't get again, then you
Exactly.
pack up. So it's
Yeah.
like, do you think there's a way we can structure like a balance, and what's that balance like? Because we can't keep doing this. I mean, you shared that on LinkedIn the other day of where
Yeah.
the some founders launched in San Francisco was saying
Yeah.
20% of the kids are from Waterloo. And
Yeah.
like you rightly called out, that's 20%. That's kids who should build businesses here who are
Yeah.
migrating south. I have a friend she's also moved. There are a couple of people who have moved out because
Mhm.
they're like,
Mhm.
Canada doesn't have anything for me.
Yeah. 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 So I definitely feel that um I think like it's definitely a balance, right? Like so I am all for free market making a decision on who should be the winner and who should be the loser in terms of getting resources. And I think like no subjective human brain should make that decision but the consumers or the market
Yes.
itself,
Yes.
right? But I also think that, hey, look, if you as a government can create an environment for people to de-risk entrepreneurship and encourage people to start companies and take some time from their career, their professional career, and to try to build a company, right? That's also a great way of promoting economic growth. But the problem is you have to maintain that balance. I think Canada, the needle is leaning towards, um, you know, unselectively, uh, giving out resources to people that should not have resources. Well, should not have resources at that time. Like when they have a product that's solving someone's genuine problem, then they should get the resources to build it. But they have to do it the hard way. Like if you're building a product to solve patient access to healthcare, then you need to go sit your ass into the hospital waiting rooms and try to figure out what's wrong with it and why people are waiting 20 hours to see a doctor at the emergency room. If you don't want to do the hard work like that, then you don't deserve to build a product to solve that problem because you don't fully understand the problem.
Yeah.
So I think like, you got to maintain some sort of like balance on that. You can't be, you know, overweight on either the free market principles or the socialist government grants for entrepreneurship. I think you can have both, and one shouldn't overpower the other. I think judging by the result that we have, that we can see right now in the state of entrepreneurship in this country, we are definitely overweight on socialist entrepreneurship handouts. Because if you look at all the capitalists deployed in the country through venture capitals, I think more than 50% of it comes from a taxpayer source, either BDC, EDC, or whatever, shred government grants, right? So I think we're definitely overweight on the socialist side and underweight on free market principle.
Yeah.
But why can't we have an equal weight?
Yeah. Isn't there
Else,
some
right?
way?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're rounding up now, and we'll do a this or that entrepreneur edition. But just devil's advocate question, and two more questions to round up
Mm-hmm.
on the interview itself.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that we see it this way because we are beside the US, and that so because you know how like culturally this is just who we are as a country, and then so because we are beside the states, so it means that every single time we're comparing ourselves with the state. I'm just being devil's advocate here, and I'm just throwing that out. It's like, is that probably why that's happening? That we're saying, because it grinds my gears. But again, I'm Nigerian. I'm so used to moving fast. I'm Nigerian Canadian now, so because Canada is my country. I love this country, but but I'm used to moving fast. So you come here, like, why is everything so? But again, am I comparing Canada to the United States? I'm not saying this is Canada's strengths, and how do we? Let's try to understand why we are this way, and then try to fix it. Because it's just a thing. I don't know if this has an answer, but it's just a thought that came to me, which is like, maybe we need to understand why we are like this.
Yeah, I think it like policy is one side, but culturally 100%. The reason why United States is called United States and not the Commonwealth of Canada is because they didn't want to submit to the monarchy in Britain collecting taxes, right? So they are more entrepreneurial, they're rebellious.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, that's a good
like
point.
the country was founded in 1776, and I would say U.S. is probably the greatest startup that ever got built.
Yes.
Right, and George Washington was the founder, right? If you think of and the founding team, Thomas Jefferson, all those people, and they were all entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
And so so you have like the people who are anti-status quo, creating that country, and so they over concentrate south of the border, and then you have people that are loyalists to the British monarchy, and they over concentrate to the north side of the border. So I think like just like the founding uh, principles of the two countries kind of like
Yeah.
set the
Yeah.
foundation of the state
Yeah.
of entrepreneurship nowadays.
Yeah.
That's number one. And number two is I think, yeah, like the welfare, like in Canada, I think universal healthcare, either you're for it or you're against it. But the fact that is that, I think when we had positive economic growth, nobody sees this as a problem being a socialist country. Hey, look, like we're doing so well. Like, so, but it's only people started complaining about the system when we don't have that economic growth, right? So Canada actually did quite well recovering from the financial crisis. I remember back in 2008, I was in high school at the time. My relatives would call us and say, "Hey, look, we hear that there's like a financial crisis going on in the States. Are you guys okay?" And then my dad was like, "You know what? Like, we don't see any slowdown in this country." Because he was a safety inspector
Hmm?
in the manufacturing space. So he got to see like the outputs from the manufacturing plants in southern Ontario. Um, so, but it's only in the recent years when economic growth started slowing down, people complain about, oh,
Yeah. All these
is
other
Canada
things.
social? Yeah. So I think, yeah, are we more socialist? Is it because of like the culture or policy? Yeah, I think definitely. But I think like also at the same time, people are trying to figure out, hey, what's the best situation we can make out of? So you have people like Toby from Shopify
Yeah.
that's trying. I think Toby is becoming quite outspoken
Hmm.
on the political stuff now, and and then you also have quite a bit of startup founders, CEOs that built $100 million or unicorn startups. They're starting to speak out on the system, right? So we have accumulated a whole bunch of liabilities because of like the zero interest rate policy, by and also like the whole economic stimulus policy from the federal government. But I think the good thing about having a recession is that it allows you to trim the fat.
Yeah. It forces you to. It forces. No, it doesn't allow
Yeah,
you. It forces you to
yeah,
trim the fat
yeah,
because you're like, you
yeah,
have no option. You want to carry with you. You want to die.
yeah. It's like a forest fire. People are saying, "Oh, we should put out every forest fire," but the forest fire exists in the nature for a reason. It's to
Yeah.
weed out the uncompetitive growth in the forest, so that you will have a more fertile and
Mm, mm,
more
mm.
vibrant forest ecosystem, right? So forest
Yeah.
fires happen all year because of that.
Yeah. Fair. Fair. And
Hmm.
thanks so much for reminding me about that that point on founding principles. Like
Hmm.
that's so good because yeah, is you see it shows up. Like it shows up in
Yeah,
how the country grows.
yeah.
I think everyone says so. We're rounding up. I have like three questions for you, and then we'll do it this or that.
Mm.
But everyone says immigrants make great entrepreneurs. Do you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think like being an immigrant, it's your superpower as an entrepreneur, because you don't have that entitlement, that self entitlement syndrome that a lot of non-immigrants have. You feel like everything I have right now, I had to work 10 times harder than other people to get this. You don't feel like you deserve to be treated like this. You deserve to have this resource and that resource. I think that's like the number one superpower that an immigrant has. And obviously, like, it's like a common thing to say, hey, if you go to Silicon Valley, most of the startup founders are immigrants, right? So I definitely feel that's a situation. And also, in the startup world, um, naturally, you are fighting the David versus Goliath fight, right? And the mentality of a David is very similar to the mentality of an immigrant, right? So I think, yeah, like I'm bullish on immigrant founders, uh, and even like uh, even for founders who are not immigrants, if you trace their lineage, they're probably, hey, like their grandpa came from somewhere that's an immigrant, and that influence from the
Yeah, it
grandparents'
shows up.
generation also shows up, 2 generations later,
It shows up.
right? Yeah.
And I think the last one before we go to this or that is, what's the one piece of advice you wish someone gave you before you started biotech company and then Capita? What's the one thing you wish someone told you?
You know what? Like there was like good advice and there was also bad advice. Um, like I literally had someone who's, I think like she was doing this out of a very well-intended context. She sat me down with her husband, who's a CFO at a $20 million company, saying how I shouldn't go start this company. I'm not saying that this in any adversarial way, but that advice I did not listen. Although she was looking out for me, and I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, and the the good advice I got, oh, they're countless. So I'm extremely blessed to have people, even just like strangers, helping me without asking anything in return. And what I learned was that these people are successful not because they're assholes, but because they're nice, and people like to help other nice people. Um, so
That's
I
that
yeah
is gold, especially in the startup world, because it feels like sometimes we glorify being an asshole.
yeah
We glorify being an asshole. Like, oh yeah, we glorify too much.
yeah
That is gold, man. Like that is
yeah
gold, honestly.
yeah. Like for example, like I always put myself in a vulnerable spot and say, hey, look, I don't know what I'm doing, and I see you have experience in building in this sector, and you create a lot of success. Can I borrow 20 minutes of your time on a Google Meet or Zoom call? So, um, yeah, like I got millions of good advice from that approach, and one of them was from a mentor and also an advisor of Capita, who's also our first investor. Yeah, like he, I don't even know where to start by listing like the number of good advice that we received from him. But if I have to name the top one, I would say, you know, talk to customers. Because he's like a YC founder and he raised capital from Sam Altman and ACZ, those big companies, those big VCs that
Yeah.
you've always been hearing about on TechCrunch. And his whole thing was like, just don't do anything, just talk to customers before you build anything. When you understand the pain point and desperation of your customers, you're ready to build. Before you do any of that, don't build. So that was like the number one advice I'd say.
Yeah. We're running up now. We do this thing called this or that, which is basically where I ask you one
Mm-hmm.
question. I ask you a question, you tell me which one you prefer.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kick off with, do you prefer working from home or working from an office?
I prefer working from an office.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I do the answer to this, but I'll just ask it. Bootstrapping or looking for investors?
I mean, I've gone through both.
Yeah.
I think it's it's very situation dependent.
Mm.
Um, so this is what I think. I think um, we benefited quite a lot by having investors on a cap table. Number one, they opened a lot of more doors for us than we could by ourselves. Number two, they kept us accountable because every month we have to send an investor update saying these are the top challenges we had this month, these are the top victories we had this month, and these are the top lessons we learned this month. So you can be bootstrapped, but when you have people that you have to be accountable for, that forces you to be disciplined. Although, you could be someone that just inherently grew up with a lot of good self-discipline,
Mm.
right? And I think if that's who you are, then, go bootstrap. And I think, yeah, like I'm an entrepreneur, like, I want to build Capita into the biggest version that we can build. But after Capita, life after Capita, I haven't thought about that. But if I have to build something, I wouldn't think about raising capital as my first to-do list
Okay.
item. Like I would think about, hey, look, am I solving a problem for someone? So what's the next step to solve this problem for these people? Okay, I got to deliver the product. Can I deliver the product without raising capital? Because raising capital, when you're raising capital, you're not building a company. It's kind of like
Mm.
you have to make that choice, right? Like your productivity just goes down when you're in a fundraising mode. Yeah, so I think it's a tough question to answer, but I think if a short answer I gave you is like a very lawyerly answer to say it depends.
Networking events or online forums?
Uh, Networking events, if it's this is actually I'm so sorry I can't give you a straight up answer.
Well, you're a
Like
lawyer, so
yeah. So the thing is like networking events. If you're not doing it cautiously, it becomes a big time waster.
yeah, I agree.
So I think like yeah, like if you're new to the community, go meet who's who and go to all those networking events. But once you already met anyone, then you don't need to go meet them again if they are not generating any value for you, right? If they're not helping you achieving your objective as an entrepreneur. Um, and online forums, you know what? I I met a lot of good people, even from like X.com threads, right? I've met people from like you and I, we met on a LinkedIn
Yeah,
comment section,
exactly.
right? So, and yeah, I think it's just like you have to be extremely objective focused, and then you always have to ask yourself, what's the short term output of this
Yeah.
thing I'm spending my time on, going to this networking event or online forum, and what is the long term output? And every month you have to have a self reflection. Hey, like, did I spend my time wisely this month?
Yeah. So we have three more: ebooks or paper books.
I have both, to be honest.
I too. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I have both. Uh,
Which do you read more though? Like I read paper books more,
then
actually.
Yeah, I actually do ebooks more because when I'm doing stuff like when I'm like out walking or I'm always driving back and forth between Kitchener Waterloo and Toronto, so that's like an hour and a half. So I put on a lot of audiobooks on podcasts on, but sometimes for personal enjoyment, I like to read paper books.
Yeah.
But if something that I absolutely have to get the reading done, then okay, I'll put it on an audiobook. Yeah.
Coffee or tea?
Man. Like, tea is yeah, like I come from a tea culture, but it just it just doesn't do anything for me. So
And the last one, I think I know the answer because of what you did at Web Summit. Industry
yeah,
conferences or like intimate web mastermind groups.
uh, go to an industry conference, but
Conference.
actually don't pay for the tickets.
Ah!
Just like yeah, just go, um, set up your own side event. Screen the people that are coming in.
That was a smart move, by the
Yeah.
way, though. That was a really good thing you did. That was a really dope move.
Yeah, like I've been doing this for a while. Like I went to the Bitcoin conference in Miami without paying for a single ticket. I just went to all the side events. And now we have some resources. I get to have my own venue. I get to pick, who are the people I want to talk to, and
Yeah.
I bring them. So, um, yeah, it's just like entrepreneurs, you always have to be resourceful, right? It's like you're not gonna charge me $800 to listen to some like level 3 advice that would not nobody would even watch on YouTube, you know? Yeah. Yeah. But I do. I actually. We did pay for some industry conference, like for example, the All In podcast, the All In Summit with Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, Chema Hapatia, David Freeberg. So we pay for that. Like I personally pay for their holiday social. Um, and we're also going to the next summit in LA. Um, so I see the value in that. I guess like the guiding principle for me
Just the
is,
value, yeah.
yeah, you always have to think about, hey, for every dollar I'm spending on something, it doesn't matter how expensive or affordable it is, what is the output? And if the over output over input is greater than one, then I think you should do it. If it's less than one,
Yeah, you
don't
should
do
just
it.
don't do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
thank you so much, Ben. This was like we spent an hour talking. Like I thought it was gonna be like
yeah,
a 30-minute conversation, but like we spent an
yeah,
hour. Like, thank you
yeah,
so
man.
much, man.
I feel like this could have gone longer. I love
Yeah.
talking with you. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, man.